Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we launch our Geolift functionality at Eppo. The title of the webinar, of course, is a game changer for modern marketers. So I'm sure we have quite a few attendees that this would be an exciting advance for. We have an agenda today, but of course, we are open to questions as they come. Any comments can go into the chat as well. But what we'll cover today is a learning culture and searching for incrementality. We also will be hosting a fireside chat with Bryce from Whoop, a senior data scientist. And then we'll go into a little more details about Eppo Geolift and what that means for you. And then we'll also have a Q&A session beyond. To introduce ourselves, hi, I'm Elizabeth George. I'm head of marketing at Eppo. I just joined and I'm very excited to be participating in this launch that is happening today. We also have Greg. Greg, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Greg Dale. I'm the marketing experimentation lead at Eppo from the product team. I've been in and around digital marketing, data science space for the past 10 or 15 years, working mobile gaming, B2B, and brand. So very excited to be working on this product and tell you all about it.
Hey, I'm Bryce Casavant. I'm a senior data scientist at Whoop. Backgrounds in economics, so this idea of incrementality lifting, where we get to a true causal interpretation of media spend, is really kind of where I think it's very useful to understand, given an input, what's going to be the output. So this is definitely going to be a very fun talk.
Awesome. So next up, we'll give a little bit of a brief overview of Eppo. Greg.
Sure. Eppo, for those who don't know, is an experimentation platform as a service. It really started by folks that came out of Airbnb, Uber, Snowflake, LinkedIn, saw a lot of the patterns that went into getting experimentation working at those companies and how effective they were, and wanted to bring it out to everybody else. And we've been able to work with hundreds and hundreds of awesome customers over the past few years, bringing really awesome, trusted statistics engines and also a focus on real business metrics, meaning like not just a click, but actually how does it influence the bottom line, to learn across all of our customers' businesses, be it product, marketing, AI, operations, kind of all across that. And as part of that effort, statistics is very important, critical for what we do here, but we've learned that truly making the math and statistics effective is a question of culture, and we're excited to bring some of those learnings from working with all those folks to you today. So we're going to talk about what is a learning culture and how does marketing incrementality fit into that. One thing that's, I think, like broadly recognized across so many different marketers is that we've never had more data. So whether it's attribution or media mix modeling, surveys, conversion lift, in platform data, stuff floating around in Jupyter notebooks, there's never more data floating around from all the different channels that the modern marketer participates in. But one thing we happen to see consistently is that at the end of the quarter, the end of the year, each of those channels, the people responsible for them normally report that they've gotten some wins. They did a test and this went up 5%, and they did another test and that went up 7%. But at the end of the period, we all tend to look back and say, where did my money go? Like, where's the actual lift in revenue and the metrics that I care about? It never quite seems to add up. And this is a very consistent phenomenon for marketing, but also in product and other areas of the business. And how do we fix this problem and kind of align ourselves to what's actually moving the needle? The reality that we all have to face is that despite us all being smart, intentioned people trying to do a good job, we never will know what initiatives will actually drive the business. So again, across that entire customer base, what we tend to see is about a third of the experiments that folks launch actually improve the metric that meant to improve. A third of them don't do much at all. It's kind of a wash. And a third of them actually cause backlash. They cause the reversal of the metrics that folks care about. And the pattern there again and again is, yeah, people tried this. Nobody launches an experiment thinking it's not going to work. And so that's why it's really important to have the system in place and kind of deeply meld it into your culture. Culture is what we all do as groups of people to kind of evaluate and guide our behavior. It's what we celebrate. It's what we invest in. It's what we collectively remember as wins. And culture can be what the boss thinks it should be. It's what the founder or the CEO or a manager thinks it should be, or it can be based on actual fact. And so experimentation means that you get to build your business culture around the right decisions, the ones that actually truly move the needle. And that's what the founders of Eppo really saw at some of those companies where they originally came from in terms of how they were able to incorporate experimentation into a core part of what they do. So within the marketing realm, we get to work here at Eppo across both user level channels and market level channels. So user level stuff is things we all know and love as marketers, web, email tests, even things like direct mail, where you get to show a message to one particular person and really see how they react. At the market level side, unfortunately, you can't really track who sees a billboard or a linear television ad, or really who saw something on TikTok, or like even digital is kind of a wash nowadays. And so we have to also be able to learn from market level results. The user level stuff fits really neatly into A/B testing, which is something we've been doing for years. And the market level tests fit into Geolift, which is the new fancy thing that we get to talk about today. Advertising obviously is a huge part of most B2C businesses. It's a tremendous expenditure. And when you start thinking about incrementality and experimentation, the two big questions that you base everything else off of are, what should I be doing and how much should I spend on it? And so whether that's sit back inventory where there's no real click to connect to a user like a YouTube or other forms of CTV, whether that's branded search where you don't really trust what Google tells you it is, or whether it's evaluating a new channel where you just want to get a total view of all the fun interactions that are happening when you try something new. Geolift and other experimentation functions are kind of broadly applicable to answer a lot of these questions. But let's take first a step back and say, why do we need all this fancy stuff? So let's say you want to test TikTok. You haven't done it before, and maybe a full budget for you is like in north of $1 million. You don't want to just like bite that off and go for it and not really know what you're going to do or what you're going to get for it. So you might say, I'll run a match market test. I'm going to launch it in Chicago, and I'll pick a market that's pretty comparable to Chicago, and I'll see the difference between those two. And that's not unreasonable. Say I pick Milwaukee, and Milwaukee will compare to Chicago. It's not crazy. It's like they're in the US Midwest. They have similar climate. They have similar culture. There's a lot of similarities between those markets. But on the other hand, Chicago is just like a much larger place. It has a higher household income, has a higher cost of living, a larger cultural reach. There's many ways in which they are totally dissimilar. So if you were to do that test, the comparison might roughly work. It's, again, like pretty reasonable concept. But rough is where things run into trouble. Rough means that it's not a test result that you fully trust, especially for that size of a decision. And diving into that element of trust is what I want to do for the next few minutes. And Geolift is something that plays really well into that. So Geolift is a more sophisticated, more trustworthy method of identifying those differences in geographic behavior. So in our TikTok Chicago example, the perfect scenario would be not Milwaukee, but a parallel universe Chicago. That's exactly the same. And the only change is whether you spend money on TikTok. Obviously, we're not magicians, can't do that. So what we're doing here, instead of picking one market, we're picking many markets and using the past behavior of the KPI you care about, like sales, to actually guide us in assembling a synthetic Chicago. And that might be a third Milwaukee, a third New York, and a whole bunch of other cities that you never would have guessed. And the sort of total composition of those is what really closely mirrors Chicago. And now you can compare the difference in sales generated by your campaign from the real one to the synthetic one. And that's essentially what Geolift is doing to derive a more trustworthy result in terms of the lift of that method. It's some fancy stats to do the first thing, but it's also trust is generated from how you operationalize it. And there's things that statistics do not know. If there's inclement weather in one of the markets that you're testing in or using as a control, that's something we have to factor in. If there's an idiosyncratic event, like you're a sports brand and there's a Super Bowl or the NBA Finals in one market, we got to factor that in. If your regulatory environment changes, if you're launching, if you're testing something else, there's a lot of other stuff that has to happen to make sure that those results are trustworthy other than the statistics. And that's something that we see be a big part of a successful incrementality test with Geolift. Trust also means that we use your real business metrics, not vendor events. All those channel tests that we talked about, whether it's web or email, those tend to be channel centric. Email tests open rate and subject line. Webs often test button clicks or add to carts, things that are happening in the channels that they can control, monitor, and analyze. But the data tends to be fairly inaccurate, often 10 to 20% inaccurate, And it's complicated. It's an event that's captured by tag manager. It's sent through Google Analytics, sent to Facebook. Facebook tells you what it is out of a black box. And you're like, I think this is right-ish, but I don't really know. So instead of all that, what we find to be super powerful is to actually test using business metrics, your actual purchases, your actual GMV, the stuff that is the same numbers that the CFO is reading, the finance team is reading. They're processed, they're clean, they're often defined in SQL in your data warehouse, things like BigQuery, Snowflake, or Redshift. That's a much better place to be testing from rather than what Meta or Google, no offense to them, say things are. And that's a really important component of trust. So when you finally do achieve trust across both A/B testing and advertising incrementality through Geolift, what it means is that there's a universal language. There's sort of a single pane of glass, one way that teams can evaluate their contributions and what their next goals should be. So if you have a type of business where it's kind of set up that marketing drives top of funnel traffic to the store, the product team is responsible for converting that traffic into purchasers. And then kind of like a mix of merchandising and CX is responsible for whether people return. That's a lot of different overlapping contributions into success. And through an experimentation culture and using your actual business metrics, you can actually start to decompose that and put all those teams on the same level as each other for their goals and results and how they all contribute to the whole. So advertising, kind of the sum of all this stuff is where we see folks wanting to get to, the most sophisticated customers we work with, as well as folks just starting up, is using these tactics to really generate trust in the actual initiatives that are moving the needle, and trust that is universal and transportable throughout the organization. And there's a lot of different things that go into that, which is my personal segue for what Bryce has learned doing a lot of this work over at Whoop. So I'll hand it back to Elizabeth.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Again, the Q&A is open, the chat's open, but we will dive right into a fireside chat with Bryce. I think we have an introduction. There we go. Bryce, did you want to first introduce yourself and Whoop and what you do over there?
Yeah, to tell you a little bit about Whoop, we are a wearable. So think about like Garmin. But instead of just tracking steps, which those do, we track kind of what we call strain. So it's full encompassing of strain, sleep, recovery. But it really came out of our founder, CEO, Will Ahmed, he would be playing squash, practicing, game day come, and he wouldn't perform. And it's because he was overtraining. So this was really kind of built out for high-end athletes. But as time gone on, we've learned that we can leverage all the other inputs such as sleep. We have a journal. We have all these different aspects where you can get a holistic picture of your fitness. So also another plug on Whoop is that we do offer a free trial. So if you want to go, you can just go to whoop.com and give it a shot for 30 days and see what you can learn about your health metrics. So that's a little bit about Whoop. And then what I do here at Whoop is I'm a business data science. We have a whole product data science that does all the algorithms for this, like workout auto detection, strain scores, everything like that. And really what I'm focusing on is truly with this media mix, with this incrementality, is trying to inform marketing of where we're spending dollars and efficiently. Because as Greg was alluding to, is that these kind are black boxes at the end of the day. They spit out a number. And usually if you aggregate all the different channels, say this is what they've acquired, it's usually well above what you truly acquired in sales. Because one person might be on Facebook, go to Google, and then go to Pinterest and TikTok, and then they all will say, hey, I acquired this person. So it actually ends up being 4 versus 1. So this is really where the incrementality kind of comes into play, to really understanding how are these performance media channels performing for us.
Awesome. Great insights. I've not yet signed up for Whoop, but I think I need to.
And also Black Friday is coming up too, so.
There you go. Okay, maybe I'll hold off, but I'm ready for it. Cool. So I'll dive right in. We do have some questions to lead off of the fireside. So first things first is, what metrics are you trying to track at Whoop and how do you measure them?
Yeah, so really for the marketing is really bringing people in through the door. So it's going to be sales at the end of the day. So it's how many can we get through. So we do have both free trials and sales. So we'll split them up or keep them combined, because it's really like how many people can we get a strap on to their wrist. So that's really the main KPIs at the end of the day for marketing is sales. We can also think about conversions, where we kind of started off the journey with getting people through the door. But as we've matured and we spent more money, we want to know where are these dollars going and where are they efficiently going to.
Makes sense. Yeah. The lifecycle marketing and things of that nature. Can you speak more to that?
Yes. So lifecycle marketing is kind of, we can think about not just re-engagement, but engagement as well. Because if you go to a website, most websites, you can capture an email. So capturing that email, we can do things such as A/B testing, like what's the best messaging for people and things of that sort. But that at the end of the day is more about conversion. So with lifecycle marketing, on the conversion side is really about, can we recapture people or re-engagement? And we do A/B testing with that. So we have maybe some sort of push notification. So this is where Eppo has been very helpful, is kind of coalescing all of our testing under one roof and know, hey, we've tested XYZ. Okay, we know X doesn't work, so let's try Y. Oh, Y works. Okay, let's maybe alter that in Z. So we can see this holistic picture of A/B testing metrics that we want to move, because lifecycle marketing might not be just focused on sales, but they could also be focused on engagement. If we have a new product feature launch, how do we want to message that? Can we message it in a way to capture more people to engage with that feature? And then that feature will become sticky for them so that they will stay with the product longer.
Checks out. What have you learned so far from channel tests? And is there anything still missing?
Yeah, so really what we've learned with channel testing, so kind of take a little step back of why we've used Eppo for this incrementality test, is we've done a little bit with Facebook because their platform is definitely much more mature at the ad marketing level than some. TikTok, we recently just did, it has incrementality, but like Pinterest, we spend with, they're like, oh, you need to spend X dollars, but we spend a fraction of that. So sometimes it becomes infeasible for us as a company to be able to leverage these channels with any sort of testing, incrementality testing that they may offer, because they want you to spend more money with them. They said. And so this incrementality with Eppo has definitely been very beneficial, is because we can do it at a smaller scale where we feel comfortable with not just throwing money down a black hole. So it's been very helpful to understanding where we spend money, because say if Facebook's okay, we spend on average, say $1,000 a day. Okay, that $1,000, how efficient is it? What we can do is, as Greg was alluding to, is turn off some channels in some areas and say, okay, if you turn it off, what's that dip in sales? And then use that change in sales from our synthetic control and say, this is what the incrementality of that $1,000. And also you can then say, okay, that's one data point, but we want to know, can we spend more? So you can go from 1,000 to 2,000 and measure that incrementality, because a lot of the spend of your first person through the door is cheaper than your 100th person through that door. You have to dig deeper to get more and more people in there, and each additional person is costlier. So you have this kind of diminishing curve. So be able to do these Geolift tests, not just being able to run one, but what we can also do is run multiple ones, where it's like one we're going to turn off, some we're going to double. And then we can kind of learn what that saturation curves are. Because maybe we were spending too much at that $1,000, and if we spend 500, that's more efficient for us as a business, though we may not get as many people, but we have more money to allocate somewhere else, to other channels or into R&D or somewhere else in the business where we can get a better ROI.
Makes perfect sense. Have you been able to integrate this into media mix modeling and other tactics?
Yes, yeah. So this is ultimately why we're doing this incrementality testing, is for a media mix model, because the media mix model can help us learn what these saturation curves are, but also then help us budget what we want to spend month over month. And then we can say, okay, is there a media mix model telling us what we expect, or are we way off? And kind of what I've seen building these in-house is that if you don't have any sort of like prior information of what these saturation curves can look like, it can just, given priors, you can get wildly different models each and every time. These are definitely very informative to understand what the incrementality is of each channel is. And then as time goes on, we can keep iterating and testing, because there's not just test once and then, okay, this is what it's going to be. There's definitely evolution of time. There's new features that come into the product that could also change what that increase. Like maybe a new feature everyone loves. Okay, that probably is going to have more efficiency per dollar spent on channels, because now we're reaching more people are willing to purchase. So there's a lot of different factors that can go into the incrementality, and measuring it continuously, you can kind of pick up on those changes.
Yeah. Greg, do you want to pop in here? Do you have any other anecdotes you'd like to add in here?
No, I think it's just pretty awesome that you kind of have like your own and found these so many different ways to integrate that, and because that's like something that so many people are trying to figure out how to triangulate, as the term that's often thrown around. But I've got attribution. It tells me something. It doesn't tell me everything. It doesn't. But I've got media mix model. I've got incrementality. Like, how do I fit that all together into something that doesn't cause me to tear my hair out, but does answer the question of what's actually moving the needle.
Yep. Yeah. And then going back is a whole feedback loop of like month over month. Okay, this is what we want to predict. This is what we want to allocate. Did we observe that? If not, okay, maybe this is really off this one channel of what we predict. Maybe let's test into that channel. So it really can help us not only learn where to spend, but also how we want to kind of go about testing, what channels we want to test.
Yeah, that's what people should be doing. I don't know. It's like A plus price. One question I talk to a lot of folks about incrementality testing, and it often means like turning something off in the short term. And I'd love to know how you've navigated that idea, the politics of it, the trade-offs, and what you've learned from needing to pull that trigger to
Yeah.
learn something.
Yeah, luckily our business is very data driven, as we are a very data heavy company, just not only from data we collect on the business side, but also with the straps. We collect data points every second when you're wearing the strap. So we are always thinking about data from a first principle. That is kind of where we want to start our ideas, where we want to kind of have it driving. Though I know with one thing is that, yes, turning spend off, us being a growth company, it can be kind of hard as we want to hit our numbers. This is what we're projecting. But on the flip side, we also want to be efficient with money. So kind of trying to sell it from not of, oh, we're going to lose maybe some sales today, but tomorrow, if we allocate our budget, we'll actually get 2 times what we would have gotten. So it's really kind of trying to sell it from the efficiency gains that we'll get in the long run than kind of what we might lose in the short run. So that's ultimately kind of how I've kind of framed it to the higher ups, is that, yes, we might lose some people early on, but overall we'll get a larger pie at the end of the day.
Yeah, I want to keep going on that. So, what have you learned from a like organizational, operational perspective about experimentation and
Yep.
kind of making it work? Like all the things I was talking about. Like, how do you like? It's not just the math.
Yes, it's getting aligned up
ChatGPT
with.
can do the math for you, but like, how do you actually activate all this stuff?
Yeah, it's really also we have to think about, because if we're just running different tests, different markets, really getting marketing and the individuals that are running the different performance media channels bought in, but also that, hey, this is kind of what we want to be doing, because they also have numbers that they need to hit. So it's really kind of everyone wants to hit the numbers, but ultimately, but if we may be able to do even better than if we do that. So it's really getting them aligned, but also knowing, hey, we have to turn the best way to think about it is get them. Most people are bought in, luckily, at the company for given the data drivenness, but really having them understand, like, we have to hold the ship in that one direction. We can't, even if it's looking bad, given the test, like some things can happen, as you mentioned, idiosyncratic shocks that kind of are unobserved to us that will kind of maybe move it here and there, but just keep it going until we get enough data. Because some people are like, oh, wow, we doubled our money and our CACs are exploding. Yes. Okay, that's a good learning, because then we probably can't double spend in here. I know that's the one thing I've saw is they got a little nervous at times of when things were going not super sideways, but they were spending a little bit more than they would have. So you can go one way of you're spending nothing and getting that nowhere, or you're spending inefficiently. So there are these little kind of heartaches and little hiccups that can happen. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you're learning more about your business such that even if you're spending a little here, losing, ultimately, you won't be doing that again. If you weren't measuring it, you could have been doing that for a longer period of time and lost out on a lot more.
So maybe the last question for this section, I think, is when I listen to a webinar or a podcast and you kind of hear those concepts, those all make sense. What's one tactic that you've learned about sharing knowledge or these learnings that's worked? Like, do you have a Confluence page, or what's the mechanism that you found to be super?
Yeah, I mean, when like with the Geolift test, like I would say, kind of any of this type of testing is like Eppo has been definitely very helpful from, especially the metric points, because certain business units have certain metrics. And Greg, you alluded to that. Eppo is all about the business metrics that you're calculating and measuring the impacts on those business metrics. So that's the place that I put all, like, for any testing is Eppo for that. And where to say, hey, I want to look at how do we do on our sales with all the tests that we're running for sales. Someone can go in there, look over a time frame and say, this is what tests have worked, this is what haven't. Or if we want to look at, say, daily active members as being a metric, people can go in and say, okay, we've run tests ABC, which ones move the most? What do we do? So it's really, you can see the holistic picture of not just, oh, here's one test we've run, but looking at from a metric standpoint, which I think is a bit better from a business side, because then you can see what works, what doesn't, what's moving the needle, what metrics can you move, what are some maybe surrogate metrics that ladder up to your KPI. So there's a lot that you can see, and having it, I think, coalesced in one central location, you get the whole picture from your testing as a company.
Oh, what about one non-Eppo thing?
Yeah, so Confluence, it used to be one, but most of them, they go into decks for in a Google deck for presenting to higher ups, and so that's most of the way. It's or Confluence, or ultimately maybe ChatGPT if you can get where you can hook up all the data points, and that's the one central location. Go talk
soon
to
enough.
about it.
Soon enough. Cool. Those are all my questions, Elizabeth.
That's great. We'll wrap up this fireside section, and then we will pop into our, I believe, Q&A.
No, we got to talk about the actual product.
Oh my goodness, we do. Yeah. Let's see how this actually works. Greg, take us away.
Cool. So we talked a lot about learning culture, methods, so the actual Geolift implementation that we're doing at Eppo real briefly, and then we'll get to Q&A. Like I was talking about, we want to move beyond a channel-centric mentality of marketing testing to one where it's business-centric, no matter whether it's a CRM experiment, an advertising experiment, a forms experiment, all have it in one place. Where we've seen people really is actually really top of funnel has been the most popular thing that we've done over the past few months as we've gotten this product off the ground. So a lot of YouTube tests, TikTok tests, but also a healthy smorgasbord of other things that are really interesting, whether they be out of home and billboards, kind of totally idiosyncratic like SEO tests or fulfillment center tests where you want to say, if I change a recipe in a fulfillment center or a procedure in a fulfillment center, will it make my trouble tickets go up? There's been a lot of really interesting use cases that have come up amongst our customers. So what we're doing over the next 12, 18 months is kind of three-pronged from a product point of view. One is automated, always-on testing. So for your major digital channels, your Metas, your Googles, your TikToks, where there's mature campaign edit APIs, reporting APIs, to automatically connect to those to execute tests, monitor their success, QA if they're actually happening or not, and kind of re-randomize over time so that we can turn incrementality from not just a one-off situation, but something that's always happening, a metronome to your business that's giving a view of how channels are contributing in both on and off season. Two is that you can't automate everything. So we'll have always the capability of doing custom powerful tests for regional television or something idiosyncratic, like I mentioned, and then continually kind of, again, wrapping those in real business metrics in a very trusted statistics engine that checks for all those gotchas that I mentioned in the previous section. For folks that haven't used Eppo before, I want to dive into what this literally means because it's very different than what you might be used to, which is that we connect directly to your data warehouse. So if you use Snowflake, we are going in Snowflake. All of the processing that we do happens inside of your Snowflake. So that means that no customer data, no PII ever leaves your walls. The only thing that we read are like the very aggregated top level numbers that are kind of all anonymized and used for the math. And those are all shown in a dashboard. And let's say you got a number that you were surprised by, going back to what Bryce mentioned, you can always like literally double click and open up the SQL query of where that number came from and what the composition of it was and change that on the fly, which is something that's been super powerful for a lot of our customers. And it's very different than kind of that tag manager segment, meta conversion API, stitched together stuff that you otherwise have to do to get a view on incrementality. Geolift for us means that we will do full end-to-end experiment design, including region similarity analysis, power analysis to make sure that the tests are likely to show a result that's significant. That's building out those treatment regions and control regions. They're all fully customized, supporting states, DMAs, commuting zones, zips, non-geographic units, whole shebang, and doing also that budget saturation analysis that Bryce mentioned of saying that I actually want to see how my spending choices evolve, how the ROI evolves at different levels of intensity. And the kind of thing that I want to really mention that applies across Eppo is that this is not a, here's this fancy thing, go figure it out process. We always support our customers with PhD level intensive support from our customer data science team and success team. And so really working with folks every step of the way to make sure they're successful in their incrementality efforts. So yeah, just to sum up, the warehouse native kind of real business metric stuff is really important and exciting for us. The cutting edge statistics that we're known for, bringing that to be accessible to both data scientists and non, and then having a single platform for both advertising incrementality, CRM tests, web tests, product tests, one pane of glass that everyone throughout the organization can use, interpret, and understand and trust. So that's the pitch. Hope to talk to any of you who would like to talk about it. We can fill out form website or email me at greg.dale@geteppo.com, and I will hand it back to Elizabeth for Q&A.
Awesome. I think doing that little brief preview there helped answer a few questions that came through. So I'm glad I didn't jump
There you
in.
go.
All right. That being said, we do still have quite a few questions that have popped up, and we'll start hitting them up. First one, what methods of the Eppo synthetic control implementation use?
Yeah, so we use a Bayesian hierarchical synthetic control model. The kind of intuition behind what it's doing is we're looking at kind of that regional level data or unit level data at the performance of the KPI that you actually care about, and looking what the patterns are in the past, let's say over the past 6-12 months, and then kind of clustering similar regions together depending on their actual behavior. One thing people often do in this world is think through a lot of, does income impact how my product sells, or is it raining? Yeah, rain actually does, but there's a lot of thinking about what will that impact the model, but we actually choose to just let the data tell us. And so we do this clustering to find the regions that are most similar to each other. Like, for example, if it's a global test, you often see the European countries end up together and Latin America ends up together. And then we use a stratified approach to pick regions from each cluster and make sure that we're equally representing regions from each type of behavior, and then go through a series of other checks to come up with the model from there.
Well, either of you could probably answer this one, but at which granularity do you run the geo experiment?
For ours that we've done the DMA area, but I'm not sure, Greg, you probably with other clients.
Yeah, it's often, like within the US, it's often DMA or community zone. Some folks have done zip clusters where there's like large DMA-like groups of zip codes. We generally stay away from zip code level randomization because zip codes are weird and people traverse zip codes like literally throughout the day. So it's not particularly reliable. But yeah, it's actually, from Eppo's point of view, a very flexible. The model doesn't actually care which level taxonomy of geography you're using, as long as the data is there.
We have a question here on, can you give a high-level overview of how Geolift setup looks like? Does Eppo connect to vendors like Facebook, Pinterest to turn on off, etc.?
Yes, that is what we're building out right now.
Awesome. Cool. All right, got one here. How do you find the right balance between control and treatment groups?
I will maybe take that first, and then Bryce, you can chime in. But it kind of goes to that process that I was talking about before of making sure that we're picking from diverse clusters of regions, and that you have balance between large, medium, and small regions, that you're not asking Bryce to go triple his spend in New York City DMA, where that's like just totally throwing off that's going to end up throwing off the entire experiment in terms of data and spend, and going through a lot of those kind of checks for idiosyncratic events, weather, etc. Bryce, not sure if you...
Yeah, we don't have much to add there. I think that's where all the points that you have.
As the actual statistician, economist.
Yeah, you try to balance everything. It's
it's never, like Geolift, there's always going to be a little bit of, it's not a randomized experiment with millions of users that you can trust randomization perfectly to just capture everything. And so that's why I kind of take that burden seriously of generating trust in the regions that we select.
Cool. I'll do two more questions. First one here is, how do all these approaches to measuring marketing spend help address what teams lost after all the new privacy laws and tracking restrictions?
Bryce, maybe I'll throw that to you. Do you feel like you've built the brave new world?
Yeah. No, I like, given I still reading Google maybe isn't getting rid of the third-party cookie, but who knows? I mean, but also iOS 14, like where you can't track people, like you can't individually target people. You can't track them around the internet, which I think definitely is great for privacy. But from the marketing side, it's a lot harder to measure kind of what you're doing. So this idea of being able to run experiments at a different level where you can measure the incrementality is definitely very beneficial. So it also alleviates possibly having to use the platforms themselves, because again, they could be telling you something totally different, where it's now everything is in your hands that you get to control.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think for me, it's kind of like a bitter medicine. Like it takes a lot of, like, it's fun to see like the real time view and data come in and people on the site and do all these things. It makes you really feel like you're doing something. But I'd say in some ways it's better now because it forces you to actually look at what, like these, like Bryce was saying, these like ground truth, like what was actually in my control. Like I used to work in mobile gaming at the dawn of that era where attribution was like a total Wild West. And what got passed off for attribution was, say it politely, like not what people thought Like people were playing a lot of games with that and cheating essentially. But it felt legit. And so people just took it. And it was only the very rare motivated advertiser that would literally dive in and try to figure this out. So incrementality gives like the real truth behind all that. And it kind of forces you to like Bryce said, take what you can control and go from there. And it's also worth saying that Geolift or it's not all these methods are applicable to absolutely everything. Like attribution is always gonna have a role for the real-time click tracking, like in B2B clicks and tracking the individual person or company is much more important than it might be in consumer. And so there's a balance to all this stuff. It's probably not going to recover everything, nor should it. But I think there's like a new world that people can build a more powerful measurement apparatus to make better decisions going forward.
I'll finish it with this last question because there's a few more. So if we did not answer your questions, we will put them in our follow-up email and we'll answer them all there. But I didn't plant this one either. It's just, why did you ultimately choose Eppo? It's a literal question.
I can't answer that one.
Yeah, I'll leave that one with Bryce.
One of the biggest things was it's a warehouse native. That's just so data doesn't have to leave. It's right there for us. Because in past with vendors working with them, egress costs you also then sometimes data's not landing there correctly. Then it can become a big headache. So Eppo is just the compute, and we own the data. So that was one big selling point. We looked at several other ones during the POC. They were great to work with, very responsive, helped out a lot, and also kind of their business model fit into what we were looking for. So it's been a great relationship so far, especially doing this POC with them for the Geolift has been wonderful.
Yeah, whoop, whoop, I guess, from our side. Cool. We'll wrap it up. Thank you so much, Bryce, for joining, and Greg for kind of running us through all this. It was really great. If anyone does want a personalized walkthrough, of course, you can pop on our site, request a demo, and we'd be happy to walk you through it and how it could work for you and your teams. But thank you. The recording will be out shortly, and we'll be sure to send follow-up for any of the remaining questions we had on here.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Bryce.
Yep, thanks.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks.
See you soon.